Welcome back. In this ITEA power lesson, I'm going to be discussing the role of customization in our warm-ups and fundamentals, specifically customization of exercises so that we can address weaknesses and deficiencies in our playing. In other words, how we can custom tailor exercises to attack our weaknesses. One of the more vital pedagogical concepts I've encountered, that I've been taught and that I've taught to students is this idea of attacking your weaknesses, of actually making a deliberate, concerted effort to isolate and refine the things that give you more trouble. I think it makes a lot of sense. If you don't go after your weaknesses, they're going to remain your weaknesses and they're going to continue to hold you back. There are a couple of commonly understood psychological phenomena which explain why we sometimes have trouble going after the weaknesses in our playing, particularly a couple of cognitive biases, the optimism bias and the confirmation bias. As musicians, these biases can lead us to focus on exercises and elements which we're already quite proficient and which we already do quite well, and also to underestimate our deficiencies in other areas that do actually require work. So in other words, you have musicians start saying, my slurs aren't that bad, I'm just gonna go do some major scales. Not to say that scales aren't important, but if you need to work on your flexibility and your slurs, that's what you should be working on. So to overcome these biases, the optimism bias and the confirmation bias, we should always strive to identify the weakest links in our playing and to include in our warm-ups and our fundamentals routine exercises that address these specific issues rather than avoiding them. Because the sooner you confront these issues, the sooner you're going to be able to take your weaknesses and turn them into strengths. You can almost think of the analogy of a game of whack-a-mole. These deficiencies in your playing, you want to hit them, you want to go after them, you don't want to ignore them because they will cause problems and you'll lose the game if you don't address them. In a previous video, I discussed cross-training as it can be applied to developing our double and triple tonguing, but cross-training can also be useful in attacking our weaknesses, kind of bridging over from areas of strength to areas of weakness. But it's also worth mentioning that you can also use individual exercises that simultaneously address an area of strength and an area of weakness at the same time. So let's talk through a couple of examples of very targeted exercises that might address very specific issues. So we'll start with myself. A couple of years ago, I noticed I was having a little trouble with pitch stability following technical passages. I could do long tones perfectly fine, but in the context of pieces or etudes, sometimes really wide angular writing that would suddenly resolve to a static held note, I would have difficulty locking in that pitch. So one exercise I developed to address that in my fundamentals is what I call articulated seventh chords exercise. And you can change the quality of the seventh chord. You can do major sevenths, dominant sevenths, minor sevenths, half diminished, fully diminished seventh. But what the important thing is that through this exercise, as you alternate these articulated and slurred passages, is holding that note steady at the very end. So it goes something like this. Another problem that I've seen with students and also had to deal with myself is these random individual treble notes, like these one or two notes in your range which just for whatever reason have a little bit more impurity, fuzz, or rumble to them. These often are transition points as your embouchure is shifting from one setup to another. You can kind of think of them as fault lines or maybe wrinkles in your embouchure, and so you want to smooth them out. So the exercise that I had this student do, and I would do myself, is just take a slurred chromatic scale. It doesn't even need to be a full octave. It could even just be a perfect fifth, kind of with starting on a note above the treble note and going chromatically through it to a note below. And you kind of work in both directions. And it's almost like, I'm thinking of the physical image of like ironing out a wrinkled dress shirt. You're kind of trying to iron out that transition in the airstream and the embouchure to where you can eliminate that little impurity in the sound. So slurred chromatic scales was one exercise that I had the student doing in the context of their fundamentals to try to address that issue. Now bear in mind, this doesn't necessarily need to be on the horn. You can do that via buzzing, either mouthpiece buzzing or half valve buzzing on the horn, if you're familiar with that drum corps trick. You can do it either way, but the goal is just to kind of essentially smooth over these little fault lines. For me, it was right around the bottom of the staff. I remember I would work on it on C tuba, just that kind of right around A flat at the bottom of the staff is where I start transitioning in my own embouchure. And so I would actually use this chromatic exercise. Some days I would buzz it, sometimes I would play it on the horn, but the idea of trying to just smooth out this little fault line. This exercise also works great for partial breaks, kind of just wherever you have a partial break where you go from an open note to think valves down, start a couple of pitches, half steps below that, and then go over the partial break above it. And again, trying to iron out those little wrinkles. Because partial breaks, when you go from an open note to when you basically change partials, those are natural wrinkle points. Those are natural points of instability. So you can use this type of an exercise to refine that out as well. Once again, I hope this lecture has been beneficial to you. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out.